Kurt Von Diest for RGG EDU, and today we're going to work on some images of leafy vegetables. Okay, so we have a few images here of some greens, some bok choy. I think this is chard. I am no expert in vegetables. And these are pretty simple images. They're really nice. Rod got a really nice even look. There's not any problems we need to solve in these pictures. We just need to give them that little extra something, a little bit of cleanup, and just correct exposure just a little bit here and there. But by and large, we just need to do some simple things. So to switch things up a little bit, I'm going to add vignetting in Capture One to look at how that happens. Under our exposure tab in Capture One, I have a vignette slider. I can just bring the corners of the image down. And I'm doing that here in Capture One because it does it nice and evenly, and I think that it's going to look nice on all four of these images. If I right-click on this image, I can copy my adjustments and select all four of them, and right-click again and say Apply Adjustments. And that's going to move my vignette adjustment onto all of them. Now, whenever I do adjustments in Capture One, I only want to do them a little bit. Anything heavy adjustment I want to save for Photoshop, because then I can do it as a layer. On this image of the bok choy in Camera Raw, I noticed that the leaf highlight here is really pretty bright. It's nice in here that we have this exposure, but this is really pretty bright. So before I go into Photoshop, I want to see if I can pull out some more tone here using high dynamic range of the Camera Raw file. So in Capture One, I have this highlight slider that I'm just going to bring down, and that just forces a little more tone into my highlights. So I think that's a nice starting adjustment to work with. Okay, so these are all ready to bring into Photoshop, and we're going to work on these all together because they're all lit the same and pretty similar needs. Command D to process them. Okay, I have all my images open in Photoshop in tabs. And I'm going to start with these leafy vegetables. So the first thing is clean up. First thing is always clean up. Doesn't have to be, you could do it later, but I think it makes sense to do the cleanup work first because it's kind of for me, since I didn't photograph these images, maybe different for you if you photograph the images that you're working on. It's kind of a getting to know you period, you know. I kind of get into the image, I kind of understand what it needs a little bit more once I've spent just a little bit of time looking at it. If I jump right into doing curves, right after I start looking at it, sometimes I find that I go a little overboard. So I like to start with cleanup as just an introduction to the picture. And these are pretty clean. I don't need to do a whole lot of cleanup in these pretty simple environments. I'm looking at the vegetables themselves to see if there's any like little torn ends or any areas that are like excessively brown that I might want to clean up here on their ends where they were clipped off. But overall, they're pretty squeaky clean. Might just take this harsh little edge, this little corner off, just to kind of smooth that out a little bit, because it's really the form of these stripes of color that's interesting in this picture, interesting to me at least. And that little corner seemed to catch my eye a little bit. With a little cleanup done, I'm going to just see what a little boost of contrast will give me here. Small move in the highlights. And once I have my shadow point in there, I like to use the arrow keys on the keyboard just to kind of refine where that point ultimately lands. Yeah, so I like that. The color gets a little richer, just a little bit more impact with that contrast. Now, I would like if this leaf got a little, this stalk got a little darker through here, and if some of the greens back in here popped out a little bit more. I think these just kind of recede into the shadows a little too much. And I'm going to do that with burning and dodging. So burning and dodging is something that I do to every picture pretty much. And certainly all four of these pictures that we've just opened up, I'm going to do some burning and dodging. So let's go ahead and learn this skill, and we'll do it in a way that it's easy to apply to multiple pictures. So there's lots of different ways to burn and dodge in Photoshop. The most obvious and the most wrong way is to use the burn and dodge tools. So these have to run on a layer of pixels, and we don't want to do that because we don't have the control to come back and edit that. We have to have a copy of our background. It's just, there's so many better ways to do it. In one of our other images that we've worked on in this tutorial, we created curves layers and edited the curves to make one that's brightening and one that's darkening, and then masked them in where we wanted to burn or dodge. And that's an okay way as well, but each time you have to decide where that point is going to be. Another way that people often learn to burn and dodge, which is an okay way as well, is to make a middle gray layer, a layer that's exactly middle gray. We'll call that 127, 127, 127 to make a middle gray layer. So one way that people learn that you may have learned to do burning and dodge, that's an okay way, is to make a middle gray overlay layer. To do that, we'll make a blank layer and say Edit Fill. And we're going to fill with middle 50% gray and leave blending mode alone and set this to overlay. And then if you paint black or white on this layer, it either burns or dodges. I'm doing this extreme just to show you it. So this is an okay way to burn and dodge, but it's not my preferred way because the burning and the dodging all happen on one layer. And I find it's nice to isolate them, to have a burning layer and a dodging layer, and to have that be in a way that is completely editable through adjustment layers. But if this is the way that you're used to doing it, that's an okay way to do it as well. The way I like to do it is to use two curves adjustments. We'll work through this twice. First, curve. I'm going to make no points on the curve. Neither of these am I going to do any points on the curve. I'm going to name it Dodge. So this is my Dodge layer. And I'm going to change the blending mode of this layer to Screen. So Screen is a lightening blending mode, and just with a layer set to Screen, it lightens the image by a set amount. Now I'm going to flip this mask to black, Command I, and this layer is ready for dodging. Now I'm going to set up my burn layer. Again, a curves layer with no adjustments, no points added to the curve. And I'm going to put this on multiply. So that's burning by a fixed amount. And I'm going to name it burn. And flip the mask to black. So with these layers set up, now I just paint white to reveal dodging. paint white to dodge on my dodge layer. And if I dodge too much, rather than burning it back in, I just undo the dodging by masking it off. So it may take a little getting used to have burning and dodging on two different layers, but once you do get used to it, this method gives you a lot more control by having them be on separate layers and have the ability to add or remove dodging and add or remove burning. But I said this is something that I do on every file, and that's a lot of steps to set up these burn and dodge layers, right? Add a curves, name it dodge, set it to screen, flip the mask to black, add a curves, name it burn, set it to multiply, flip the mask to black. This is a lot of steps. So luckily Photoshop has a utility for that called actions. And an action is a part of Photoshop that allows you to record a series of steps that you take and then replay that series of steps. So you don't have to remember all those steps or do all those steps. All you have to do is press play. So this burning and dodging is a perfect example of something that we should record an action for. So we need to work through it again anyway, so let's go ahead and do that and record an action. To start with, I'm gonna make an action, a folder of actions in my actions palette. And I'm gonna name this Kurt's action. So it's important to have a folder for your actions rather than recording it in the default actions. And I'm just gonna click this little new button to record a new action. And this one is gonna be burn and dodge. You can also create a keyboard shortcut if you wanted it to be Command F1 or something like that to record this action. To play back this action, you can do that here. Okay, now that it's recording, I want to walk through all my steps one by one. I'm going to make a curves, and I'm going to name it dodge. And I'm going to put it on the blending mode of screen, and I'm going to flip the mask to black. And now I'm going to make another curves, and I'm going to call it burn. Put it on multiply, and flip the mask to black. And now I'm going to stop my action. And I see that I have my burn and dodge, and here are all of the steps in my action. And so just to test it out now, I'm going to delete my burn and dodge layers and play back my action and see that it just, boom, creates my burn and dodge layers. So that took an extra minute to go ahead and set this up as an action, but that's going to repay itself when I burn and dodge on my next 3 images of leafy vegetables. So with my dodge now, I'm going to just dodge out, highlight shape, just to kind of reinforce this stripy effect of this image. I like all these layers, and just by dodging along the highlights, I kind of refine the shape of those. The ends kind of get dark, so I might look at dodging a little more extreme on the ends so my eye really comes down here where it's in focus. And I want to dodge out some of these green details at the back end. Again, if I dodge out of the lines or do something I don't like, I can mask off the dodging rather than going back and burning. It's always best to undo something that you did rather than making an additional move to counteract that on top of it. And generally speaking, when I'm dodging, I like to use a 10% opacity brush. And so now with my burning, I can come in any any little shadow areas in here. I can kind of burn down just to clarify those divisions between the different lines. Anywhere that gets just a little hot, maybe I can tone down. And I can also use this to add just a little bit more vignette to my extreme corners, which in this picture, I really like having some of that background just recede down. It kind of keeps my eye focused on the center. Okay, this looks nice. I'm gonna move on to our next picture in this series and do the same process. So I have my other Swiss chard, I think. Oops. Break these all out of tabs. I have 2 bok choy and 2 chard. And they're all lit similarly. So from my first chard, I'm just going to borrow this curves layer that I made and bring it down to my second image. And I'm going to start with that same curves adjustment and see if it's right for this picture. No, in this picture, actually, maybe that shadow point is a little heavy for this picture. So I'm just going to adjust that curves. And I'm going to play my burn and dodge action here to set up those layers. See how easy that was this time. Did that work of setting up the action. And now forever, as long as I retain that action, it's easy to do. A little burn and dodge, a little dodge where the greens of the green color gets a little lost in the shadows, and burn down little areas where the highlights are a little too intense. Again, that allows some of that green color to really show through. And again, on the burn, I'm gonna just intensify my vignette on that, particularly that back edge, just a little bit more to fine tune it. And just do a little cleanup here. With my clone stamp set to current and below, it doesn't matter that I have these adjustments above because it's focusing on the current layer and the ones beneath it. You want to be sure it's current and below and not all layers. If it were all layers in this situation, it wouldn't work because it would be taking some of the brighter information from looking at the composite with the curves and then adding those pixels down beneath it. And then the curves would be applying more curves to that adjustment. So essentially, if you do that, if you have clone stamp set to all layers, and you're cloning onto a layer underneath some adjustments, that cloning winds up getting double the adjustment. And so your cloning doesn't match the areas around it. So if you're ever cloning on a blank layer and it's not working, something is just not doing, is not behaving correctly, more than likely it's either because your source is set to current layer or it's set to all layers. If it's set to current layer, it just won't do anything. And if it's set to all layers and you have adjustments above it, then it's not going to blend right. Okay, so just a little cleanup here from any little spots that catch my eye. Not too bad, it does not need very much. And this is looking nice. The biggest area is this one area where the leaf was a little broken and jagged. I think smoothing that out is pretty nice. So some fine tuning there. And let's move on to our bok choy. So this is kind of a different setup, so I'm not going to carry my layer over. I'll just make them new again. In Capture 1, we pulled down the highlight slider because this leaf was a little bright, but I still might just look at darkening that down further with some curves. It's nice to get it started with Camera Raw and then carry it a little further in Photoshop. Because with that Camera Raw adjustment, you want to do just a little bit, just to get a good starting point. It's kind of like scanning film, if anybody remembers that. You want to get a good starting point to work with. You don't want to scan it in with the ultimate contrast that you want. You want to add that as you go. So curves pulls down that highlight area, and I've also used this same adjustment to add just a little bit more vignette. And some quick cleanup here. A little section of this plant that's brown where I think it should be this light green, so I'll just clone that out. Any brown spots on the leaves? Okay to remove, I think. And this little water droplet on this leaf really catches my eye because there's not mist or anything on this plant. It's just this one drop. And it's in that high contrast area. It really catches my eye. It's a little out of place, so I'm gonna get rid of it. Might not do that if there were other drops on the plant. But since it's kind of the lone drop, I'll go ahead and get rid of it. Looks like a mistake. Okay, and now we'll just play the burn and dodge action and finish this off with some burning and dodging. So here I just want to clarify the edges of the leaves a little bit. I like how this curves around. If I just dodge that out a little bit, it kind of refines that shape. And where this fine edge of this leaf comes, I can dodge that out. Bring a little more emphasis there. So burning and dodging should always be a small move. If you need a really heavy move, it's best to do that with its own curves layer. If you need to dramatically make something lighter or darker, that's what you want a separate curves for that adjustment. Burning and dodging is just a little bit extra lightening or darkening. It's a small refinement. And I might burn down in the center of the leaf just to give it a little more dimension down into that hole, the center of the bok choy. And for consistency's sake, maybe add a little bit more to that vignette like we did on the other leafy vegetables. And now this shadow thing is kind of bothering me, so I'm gonna tone that down, and then I think we'll be done with this image. All right, one more leafy vegetable to go. This one we have a tray with some lemon. Lots more little highlight things that catch my eye in this one. A lot more going on, but it's still the same basic lighting setup. So we might need a little bit more cleanup here, but just a little hit of contrast, and then some burning and dodging is ultimately all this really needs. Boy, just a little contrast really clarifies that blue color of the dish. I really like that. Get the nice color contrast between the green and the yellow, the lemons, and this blue. I love this hit of lemon here. The other lemons, the yellow maybe could be clarified a little bit more. Kind of looking at my overall tone, and it seems like the surface gets really dark. I'd like to bring in a little bit more exposure into that surface, kind of lighten the overall environment some. And that's a bit more of a heavier move than I want to do with burning and dodging. So I'm doing it with a separate layer here. So we're going to say burning and dodging just for that small refinement. Okay, time for some cleanup. And it's really the hits of white here and there that are catching my eye. I don't want to make this table too smooth. It's a weathered surface, so okay, now I think my cleanup is all looking good. Just gonna perfect this with a little burning and dodging. Play my action, and now I can dodge out just the shape of some of these leaves. I'd also like to kind of call attention to the edge of this pan. I like to see that this is actually a pretty deep pan, and if I add a little dodging to the top edge, and maybe burn the sides just a little bit, I think it's going to clarify that there's the depth involved here. Generally, when I'm dodging, I like to look for natural highlights and dodge them out, just so there is a natural highlight along the shadow edge of this pan. And I'm just holding down my shift key, clicking once, coming to the end of this straight line and clicking again, and Photoshop connects the two with a straight line. So it's a nice, easy way to kind of dodge out a line. Just want to add a little more highlight there, because there is a highlight, it just doesn't really come through. Now for just a little bit of burning. down the edge of this pan. And just to clarify our vignette like we did on the other images in this series. Maybe a little bit here where it's a little bright on the meat of this bok choy. Last little step, I just want to punch up the yellow in those 2 little lemons, and then I think that that will be all we need. Just a little more contrast is going to ramp up the yellow there. And I'm just going to mask that in ever so slightly. If I need a little bit more in this same curves, now that I have it masked in, I can go into blue channel. Blue is the opposite color of yellow. So if I pull down blue, I'm going to be making it more yellow. I just want to do that a little bit. It's just to clarify that these are yellow lemons, because I really like the contrast of color that gives. So now we'll look at all 4 of these images up on the screen at the same time and see how well they family up. I like to work on images in series like this because then you can play one off the other, look at them all, go back and make an adjustment to one that you see something that's working in one and carry that over into the other. But by and large, I think these are looking nice. I'm going to save them on and move on to our next shot.